Have you ever wondered what houses were like in the time of Jesus 2,000 years ago? Where did people sleep, how did they build, and what was life like inside a home in the biblical era? In this biblical documentary, you'll discover the architecture, the materials, and the secrets of the homes that were part of Jesus' world. Have you ever wondered what really surrounded a house in the time of Jesus? Before crossing the doorway, before picturing rooms, courtyards, or mud roofs, we need to pause for a moment and look at the outside world. Because understanding the historical and social context is like adjusting a camera lens. Suddenly, everything comes into focus. Let's go back almost 2,000 years. We find ourselves in a small region of the Roman Empire, on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. Jerusalem is the religious and political heart, a vibrant place filled with pilgrims, merchants, priests, and soldiers. But not everyone lived in the big city. Most of the population lived in rural villages, farming communities where family traditions were passed down generation after generation. One of those villages was Nazareth, the place where Jesus spent much of his life. Imagine dirt roads, the sound of animals, the smell of freshly baked bread mixed with dust and smoke. Homes weren't isolated like many modern houses. They were clustered together, sharing walls, courtyards, and ovens. Life was deeply communal. Everyone knew who you were, which family you came from, and what you did for a living. In that world, a house wasn't just shelter, it was identity, security, inheritance. Climate also played a decisive role. Long, dry, hot summers, short winters with rains that could turn streets into mud. Every building decision responded to that reality. Walls had to protect from intense heat during the day and retain some warmth at night. Roofs had to endure the sun, but also allow outdoor activity when the weather made it possible. Nothing was accidental. Now think about the economy. Far from the image of grand palaces, most families lived with limited resources. They were farmers, craftsmen, fishermen. They paid taxes to Roman power and local authorities, leaving little room for luxury. Houses, therefore, were functional. They were built with whatever was available nearby. Limestone in some areas, mud and adobe in others, wooden beams when they could be obtained. But here's something fascinating. Even if they were humble, these homes were full of life. Children running, women grinding grain, men repairing tools, neighbors coming and going. The home was also a workshop, a storeroom, a dining space, and often a stable. The line between private and public space was far more blurred than it is today. In more important cities, the picture changed a bit. Capernaum, for example, had more defined streets and intense commercial activity because of its proximity to the lake and trade routes. There you could find more complex homes, some with multiple spaces arranged around inner courtyards. And yet, even in those places, simplicity still dominated. Social structure also shaped the way people lived. The family was the absolute core. We're not talking only about parents and children, but grandparents, uncles, cousins. Several generations could share the same roof or live in connected structures. That meant spaces had to be adapted constantly. A wedding could mean expanding, adding, reorganizing. The house grew along with the family. Meanwhile, the religious world permeated every corner of daily life. Purity rules, traditions, celebrations, everything affected how spaces were used. Where food was stored, how it was prepared, who could enter certain areas. Understanding this is key, because many scenes in the biblical accounts happen precisely in that domestic setting. Now let me point out something that often surprises people. When we imagine the past, we tend to see it as static, almost frozen. But these communities were dynamic. There was trade, news arriving from other regions, Roman soldiers moving through, travelers telling stories. Homes were meeting points where information, rumors, and hope circulated. Think for a moment about life expectancy, disease, the harshness of physical labor. Coming home at the end of the day meant survival. It meant food, rest, protection. That's why the home carried enormous emotional weight. It wasn't just a building, it was the place where life endured. And this is where the context begins to illuminate everything we'll see next. Every stone, every roof, every small architectural detail responded to real pressures: economic, climatic, social, and spiritual. Nothing was designed to impress. Everything was meant to last and to serve. So when, in a few minutes, we step into one of these houses, we won't be looking at mere ruins or reconstructions. We'll be entering the heart of a first-century family. We'll hear echoes of conversations, prayers, everyday worries. Because understanding where they lived is, in the end, the beginning of understanding how they lived. And that discovery can completely change the way we imagine the world of Jesus. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more content like this. That way you'll always be up to date with our next videos. Now, let's keep going. What materials would you use if you had to build a house without machinery, without modern cement, and with whatever nature offers just a few steps away? That's the question that opens the door to the real challenge of building a home in the time of Jesus. Because behind every wall there was physical effort, knowledge passed down through generations, and above all, adaptation to the environment. When we think of ancient constructions, we sometimes imagine fragile, improvised structures. But reality is more interesting. People in the first century knew exactly how to use available resources to create homes that were sturdy, cool in summer, relatively warm in winter, and able to last for decades. The main star was stone. In many regions of Judea and Galilee, limestone was within easy reach. There was no need to dig deep mines. It was enough to cut blocks from nearby hills. It was an abundant, solid material and, very importantly, it offered thermal mass. During the day it absorbed heat and at night it released it slowly, making the interior more livable. Still, working stone wasn't easy. It required time, tools, and labor. That's why, in more humble homes, it was combined with another fundamental material: mud, earth, water, straw. A mixture that seems simple but, when prepared well, could become adobe bricks or surprisingly effective plaster. Mud sealed gaps, insulated against wind, and protected the structure. Now picture the scene: men and women stomping the mixture, molding blocks under the sun, waiting days for them to harden. Each brick represented hours of communal work. Building a house was a family project, even a neighborhood project. It wasn't only about raising walls, it was an act of cooperation. Wood was scarcer. There weren't large forests everywhere, so getting long beams could be costly. Even so, wood was essential for roofs and doors. It was reused, repaired, inherited. A good beam was a treasure. Nothing was wasted. And speaking of roofs, here we find one of the most ingenious parts of these homes. First, the main wooden beams were laid. On top of them, smaller branches, reeds, or brushwood. Then came a thick layer of mud mixed with straw, packed down until it formed a compact surface. That roof was strong enough for people to walk on, dry food, or even sleep there during hot nights. Do you realize what that means? The roof wasn't just cover, it was an extra outdoor room. And that deeply influenced daily life. Doors were usually wooden, sometimes reinforced with simple metal elements. Windows, when they existed, were small, not for aesthetics, but for security and temperature control. The fewer openings, the easier it was to keep the interior protected from heat, cold, and intruders. Another fascinating detail is the floor. In many homes it was simply compacted earth. In others, it could be covered with a layer of plaster or flat stone. It wasn't luxury, it was basic hygiene. Making cleaning easier made a huge difference in spaces where people and animals lived side by side. And here's something we often forget: materials also reflected social status. Families with more resources could afford better cut stone, more wood, more careful finishes. But even then, construction still depended on traditional techniques. Modernity as we understand it today didn't exist. The durability of these houses depended on constant maintenance. After rains, it was necessary to check for cracks, reinforce the roof, reapply mud. It was a continuous cycle. Living there meant caring for the structure as part of the yearly routine. The most impressive thing is that, despite the simplicity of the elements, the result was functional. Cool when the sun beat down, protected when storms arrived, adaptable as the family grew. It was architecture born from experience, not from paper blueprints. And the more we understand the materials, the clearer the picture of daily life becomes. We can imagine hands stained with clay, the sound of tools striking rock, the smell of damp earth drying in the sun. We can picture children helping, learning from an early age how to keep standing the home that would one day be theirs. Because these houses weren't finished products, they were living organisms that evolved over time. So the next time you think of a first-century dwelling, Don't imagine it as a silent ruin. Imagine it under constant construction, shaped by real hands, urgent needs, and practical wisdom that allowed entire communities to survive for generations. And now that we know what they were made of, we're ready to cross the threshold and discover how life was organized inside. Can you imagine opening a wooden door, bending slightly to pass through, and suddenly stepping into the space where almost all of a family's life unfolded 2,000 years ago? We're not talking about a quick museum visit. We're entering a real home, with noise, smells, heat, movement. A place where every corner had a purpose and where design responded to daily survival. The typical home of an ordinary family in the time of Jesus was, above all, practical. Nothing was extra. Nothing was placed there on a whim. When you crossed the entrance, you often didn't find hallways or separate rooms like today, but a main multipurpose space. It was where people cooked, worked, talked, received visitors, and at certain hours also slept. But before moving on, pause and look at the size. These homes were usually small by modern standards. And yet, they could house several people and even different generations. Parents, children, grandparents, close relatives. Physical closeness was a natural part of life. In many cases, the heart of the house was the courtyard, an open or semi-open area that let in light and air. Essential tasks happened there: grinding grain, preparing food, washing utensils, chatting with neighbors who stopped by. The courtyard was where the inner world and the outer world met. Now imagine the constant sound, millstones turning, conversations, footsteps, animals moving. Because yes, in some homes, especially in villages, part of the space was also used to shelter animals at night. This offered protection from theft and helped preserve warmth in winter. It may seem strange today, but it made perfect sense then. Let's keep exploring. Near the main area, it was common to find simple mud ovens. They weren't modern kitchens with neatly defined compartments. They were basic structures where daily bread was baked, a vital staple. Making bread wasn't occasional, it was part of the daily rhythm, repeated again and again. Storage was another key aspect. Families needed to keep grain, oil, wine, tools. So you would see large jars against the walls, baskets hanging, small niches carved into the structure. Every object had its place because space was limited and order made life easier. Now look up. You might find a staircase or a structure leading to the roof. And here something fascinating happens. The rooftop was a vital extension of the home. Agricultural products were dried there, work was done, and people rested as evening fell. During hot nights, many preferred to sleep up there under the open sky. Think about the difference from our houses today. Now the roof is a boundary. Back then, it was an opportunity. Back inside, were there private rooms? Sometimes yes, but not always as we understand them. There might be a more sheltered area for parents or for storing valuables. But most of life was shared. Privacy was a different concept, less tied to walls and more to family agreements. Lighting depended on the sun during the day. At night, small oil lamps offered dim light, enough to move around but not for major tasks. That directly shaped the schedule. Many activities began early and ended shortly after nightfall. The floor, usually packed earth or stone, endured constant traffic. Sitting on the floor was common. High tables weren't essential. Eating, working, talking, everything happened at a different height than we're used to. And within this apparent simplicity, there was beauty. Maybe a hanging textile, well-made utensils, carefully maintained containers. It wasn't ostentatious luxury, but it was pride in the home. One thing that really stands out is how flexible the space was. During the day, the main area could function as a workshop. At night, that same place became a bedroom. Mats and blankets were laid out, and the house changed function in minutes. The architecture allowed constant transformation. Now picture a visitor arriving. There was no modern isolation. Doors were more open to the community. Receiving someone meant quickly reorganizing space, offering water, bread, hospitality. The home was the stage for essential social relationships. Domestic life was deeply connected to tradition, preparations for Sabbath rest, family celebrations, moments of mourning. Everything happened there. The walls were silent witnesses to joys and worries. And the more we move through this home, the more obvious one thing becomes: every square meter had to deliver maximum value. There was no room for waste. That constant pressure shaped the creativity of the people who lived there. Now I want you to imagine children growing up in this environment. They learned by watching. They saw their parents cook, repair, store, negotiate. The home was also a school. Every corner taught skills needed for adult life. The smoke from the oven, the texture of stone, the feel of mud underfoot, everything became part of daily memory. Stimuli that feel exotic to us were normal to them. And yet, despite the cultural distance, something deeply human remains. The desire to protect family, to have a place of one's own, to share food and conversation at the end of the day. That continuity connects us to them in a surprising way. When we look at archaeological reconstructions or models, they sometimes seem too still. But reality was dynamic. People coming and going, simultaneous tasks, quick decisions. The home was a vibrant space. As we move forward in this documentary, understanding the layout of the house will help us interpret many scenes of first-century life. We'll understand how it was possible to gather so many people in one place, how they moved, where they sat, how they interacted. Because architecture isn't just stone and mud. It's human behavior solidified. And now that we've walked through the home of an ordinary family, we're ready to go further. In the next minutes, we'll see how this same space transformed throughout the day, how it shaped the rhythm of work, rest, and relationships. But for now, hold on to this image, a small house full of life, where every corner had a purpose and where history, perhaps, passed closer to the doorway than we ever imagined. Can you imagine what it would be like to live a full day inside a first-century house, from the first ray of sun to the moment the last oil lamp goes out? We're not talking only about the place, but about the routine, the repeated gestures, the sounds that mark time. Because understanding daily life inside the home is, in fact, getting close to the very heartbeat of that society. The day began early. Very early. Before the heat became intense and before the tasks of field or workshop demanded all the energy. As soon as light appeared, the house woke up. No clock was needed. The sun set the rhythm. Maybe the first thing you would hear was someone stirring the embers in the oven. Keeping fire was essential. Making daily bread required planning, effort, and practice. Grinding grain, mixing flour, kneading. It was physical work repeated almost every day and involving several family members. Meanwhile, others went to fetch water. This detail is crucial. There were no faucets or automatic tanks. People had to walk to the spring or well, fill jars, and carry them back. Water determined cleaning, cooking, drinking. Without it, the house simply didn't function. Now think about children. Far from a childhood separated from work, they grew up participating. They helped with simple tasks, watched, learned. The home was a permanent learning space where each activity passed on knowledge. As the morning progressed, many men went out to work. Fields, fishing, construction, trade. The home then remained the center of domestic production, preparing food, spinning, mending clothes, organizing storage. It wasn't free time, it was another kind of work. And yet, even amid effort, there was conversation. Shared stories, news from neighbors, comments about weather or harvests. Communication was inseparable from routine. At midday, the heat could be intense. Thick walls helped, but the rhythm necessarily changed. Some tasks slowed down. Seeking shade became a priority. Here, the house design again showed its intelligence. The courtyard provided ventilation, the interior provided refuge. Meals were usually simple but meaningful: bread, olives, fruit, perhaps some fish or legumes. Eating wasn't only nourishment, it reaffirmed family unity. It was a pause within the day. As hours passed, new responsibilities appeared: repairing tools, preparing for the next day, caring for animals if they were part of the household. Each person had a role. Survival depended on coordination. Now imagine the afternoon. Light begins to soften. Heat eases. The rooftop or courtyard becomes pleasant. It's time for quieter gatherings, long conversations, watching children play. But not everything was rest. Night still had to be prepared, storing what was needed, securing entrances, organizing the place to sleep. Remember, the same space changed function. Where there had been intense activity, soon mats and blankets would be spread. When darkness arrived, the atmosphere changed. Oil lamps gave warm, limited light. That kind of lighting drew people close. Stories, teachings, and prayers found a perfect setting there. And here a deeply human aspect appears, taking stock of the day. Conversations about what went well, worries about tomorrow. The house protected physically, but also emotionally. Sleeping meant adaptation. Several people sharing the same space, perhaps in different areas or levels. Privacy was different, but the sense of belonging was strong. Being together meant safety. Throughout this daily routine, smells, textures, and sounds repeated until they became familiar. The creak of wood, the murmur of wind, the faint glow of a flame. They were signs of normality, of continuity. The interesting thing is that, although from the outside it might look like a hard life, it was also full of meaning. Each task had purpose. Each effort directly supported the well-being of the group. If we pay attention, we notice the house wasn't simply a place to return to at the end of the day. It was the engine that made it possible for the day to begin again. It was where people planned, stored, learned, and rested. And by understanding this routine, we begin to see many scenes of the ancient world with new eyes. We better grasp the importance of hospitality, of sharing bread, of gathering at evening. Everything fits into this domestic dynamic. 2,000 years may have passed, but the essence of coming home, finding your people, and closing the day together is something we recognize immediately. So, as the lamp burns down and the murmur fades, the dwelling falls silent for a few hours. But it's not an empty silence. It's a pause before, with the first ray of dawn, life begins again. And tomorrow, every gesture will repeat once more, sustaining a way of life that, thanks to these homes, could endure for generations. Were all houses the same in the time of Jesus, or could the place where you lived immediately reveal your position in society? The answer is more striking than it seems, because even though many homes shared techniques and materials, the differences between rich and poor could be felt from the very first step inside. So far we've explored the home of an ordinary family, tight spaces, multiple functions, constant work. But the first-century world wasn't uniform. There were economic levels, privileges, networks of power, and all of that was also expressed in architecture. Imagine walking through a village and seeing very similar homes made of stone and mud, grouped around courtyards. Suddenly, among them, a larger, better-finished structure appears, with stronger walls and perhaps simple but visible decoration. Without asking, you already know someone with resources lives there. Wealthier families could afford more space. More square meters meant more comfort, but also more prestige. It wasn't only about room to sleep, it was the ability to separate functions, an area to receive guests, another for storage, another more private for the family. That division created a completely different domestic experience. Now think about the psychological impact. In a humble house, almost everything happens in front of everyone. In a richer one, boundaries appear, extra doors, reserved rooms, areas not just anyone could enter. The home began to mark hierarchy. Materials also spoke. Better cut stone, more carefully made floors, greater use of wood. Even small details like plastered walls could transform the feel of the place. We're not talking about luxurious palaces in the Roman style in most cases, but we are talking about a noticeable leap compared to the average home. And here's something fascinating. Having a larger house changed the way you related to the community. It allowed you to offer hospitality to more people, host gatherings, exert influence. Physical space became a social tool. Higher status homes could include large courtyards surrounded by several rooms. These courtyards became centers of activity where people could work, negotiate, or even celebrate important family events. Architecture made leadership easier. Meanwhile, poorer families lived at the edge of capacity. Every corner had to be used. Animals shared areas, storage was tight, and any visit required immediate reorganization. Life was more exposed, more vulnerable. But be careful not to oversimplify. Poor didn't mean messy or lacking dignity. Many humble houses were amazingly well kept. The difference was access to resources, not the desire to have a good home. Another clear marker of status was access to certain objects. Finer pottery, better quality textiles, specialized tools. These items didn't just make tasks easier, they communicated prosperity. When someone entered, the message was obvious. Now imagine the contrast from the perspective of a visitor moving from a modest dwelling to a more comfortable one in the same day. their perception of the world would shift. Possibilities would seem to widen. Space shaped imagination. In major urban areas, some elite residences could lean more toward Greco-Roman style, with visible external influences. Yet even there, local traditions remained present. It was a mix of aspiration and cultural continuity. Differences in size also affected intimacy. In larger homes, private conversations could truly be private. In small homes, almost everything was shared. That changed family dynamics, decisions, conflicts. And here a key question emerges. How did this impact religious and social experience? Larger houses could become meeting places, spaces where ideas were discussed, teachings were heard, bonds were strengthened. The physical environment amplified what happened inside. Meanwhile, in humble homes, faith and tradition were just as alive, but fewer people could gather. Spatial limits shaped the kind of meetings possible. There was also a difference in the ability to adapt. A family with resources could expand, remodel, improve. A poor family had to patch what existed, reuse, endure. Creativity was born from necessity. Taken together, we see the house as a visible reflection of social structure. No announcement was needed. You just had to look. But at the same time, something deeply human unites both ends. In the simplest dwelling and in the larger one, people sought the same things: security, continuity, a future for their children. Walls could vary, size too, but the desire to belong to a place was shared. And the more we explore these differences, the clearer the complexity of the world Jesus and his contemporaries lived in becomes. It wasn't a flat society. There were contrasts, aspirations, tensions. Understanding that helps us interpret many historical situations better. It allows us to imagine what it felt like to cross different thresholds, how interaction changed depending on space. So architecture stops being a silent backdrop and becomes a protagonist. It speaks of power, opportunity, limits. And as we move forward, we'll see that some of the most significant stories of that era take on new meaning when we understand exactly what kind of house they may have happened in. Because in the end, the size of a home could change much more than comfort. It could change the course of a conversation, the scope of an invitation, even the reach of a teaching. And for those who lived there, that made all the difference. What if many of the most well-known scenes in the Gospels took place in spaces far smaller and more ordinary than we usually imagine? Pause for a moment and think about that. Not in grand marble halls or monumental buildings, but in stone rooms, mud roofs, courtyards where only a small group could fit. When we understand what those houses were really like, the stories gain a new, almost tangible force. The texts mention homes again and again, places where people eat, talk, heal, forgive, argue. Spiritual and social life unfolds within domestic walls. That tells us something fundamental. The house was the main stage of everyday transformation. Imagine, for example, a dwelling in Capernaum. Fishermen, craftsmen, families who have known each other forever. News travels fast. When someone important arrives, the rumor spreads through the streets in minutes. Suddenly the inside of a house fills up, people by the door, in the courtyard, perhaps even on the roof, trying to listen. Now remember the famous scene of the paralyzed man lowered from above. If we know the typical structure of these houses, the image stops being merely symbolic and becomes practical. A roof made of beams, branches, and mud can be opened and repaired. It's not an impossible feat, it's a bold action within flexible architecture. That detail completely changes the perception. We no longer see a miracle surrounded by monumentality, but by closeness. People packed together, expectant, sharing the same air. Another fascinating moment appears when we think about meals. Many teachings were shared around a low table or even on the floor, with guests reclining and the host focused on hospitality. In that intimate atmosphere, every gesture carries weight. A word, a glance, an act of service can resonate far more than in a large space. The house amplifies closeness. In Jericho, for example, imagine the home of someone with resources, able to receive visitors. The encounter doesn't happen in the public square, but inside. Crossing that threshold means acceptance, relationship. Entering a house is more than visiting, it is sharing life. And then there's Nazareth, the village where Jesus grew up. Thinking about its humble clustered houses with shared courtyards helps us understand the intensity of the community. Everyone watches, everyone comments, everyone remembers. Private life is limited, and reputation travels fast. When we read that someone teaches in a house, we have to imagine the logistics. People arriving, filling every available corner. Those closest trying to hear, those outside stretching to see. The space shapes the experience. There are also accounts of personal encounters, deep conversations that happen inside specific homes. There, away from outside noise, important decisions are made. Architecture offers emotional refuge. Homes allow something open spaces don't always make easy, vulnerability. Inside, people can ask, doubt, cry, change. Another key element is hospitality, offering water for feet, sharing bread, preparing a place to rest. These actions, which might seem simple today, were powerful declarations of acceptance, and they all happened within the domestic setting. As we understand a typical house layout, we start to visualize movements, where the host would stand, how guests would enter, which areas were more public. The Gospels stop feeling abstract, they become human choreography. Even conflicts gain a new dimension. An argument in a tight space feels different. There's no anonymity. Reactions are immediate. The house intensifies emotion. Think too about how often people gathered in these places to hear teaching. That tells us about trust. Not everyone opened their door to large groups. Doing so required courage and commitment. Homes, therefore, weren't just backdrops. They were catalysts for change. Communities formed there, friendships strengthened, social barriers broke. And the more we imagine these interiors, the more obvious the humanity of the scenes becomes. Real people with real concerns, packed into rooms where every word could be heard clearly. There is something deeply moving about realizing that many ideas that transformed history were shared in such simple spaces. They didn't need grand architecture. They needed attentive ears. And understanding this helps us appreciate the message's mobility, from house to house, family to family. Walls served as connection points in a living network that expanded. When a visitor left a home, they carried what they had seen and heard. The dwelling became the starting point for new conversations elsewhere. The next time you hear one of these accounts, try placing it mentally inside a modest interior with oil lamps and people very close together. The experience changes immediately. It becomes more intense, more personal, more possible. Because in the end, the houses mentioned in the Gospels remind us of something essential. The transformation of the world began in ordinary spaces, in homes where life went on while something extraordinary happened within the walls. And now that we've stepped into those rooms, it's impossible to imagine them the same way again. How do we really know all this? What if I told you that beneath today's dust there are still streets, walls, and rooms that allow us to walk, almost step by step, through the interior of a house from 2,000 years ago? This is where archaeology steps in and turns imagination into evidence. So far we've reconstructed scenes, routines, and spaces. But it's not just pretty theories. For decades, careful excavations have brought to light housing remains that confirm many of the details we've mentioned. And most exciting of all, when archaeologists remove layer after layer of earth, the past begins to speak. Imagine the moment of discovery. A line of stones appears, then another. Suddenly the outline of a room takes shape, a worn floor, pottery fragments, oven remains. We're not looking at isolated ruins, we're stepping into the intimacy of real families. In Capernaum, for example, clusters of houses have been uncovered grouped around courtyards, exactly as historical studies describe. Rooms are small, connected, designed for multiple functions. When you look at the site, you can almost hear the echo of conversations. The walls reveal simple but effective building techniques: local stone, mud, visible repairs, clear signs of constant maintenance. That confirms these homes weren't static structures, they evolved over time. Now think about the objects found: hand mills for grain, oil lamps, storage containers. Each piece is a clue. It tells us about diet, schedules, economy. It's like assembling a puzzle where every fragment adds a detail of daily life. What's interesting is that archaeologists often find layered levels. One house built over another, renovations, expansions. That shows generations living in the same place, adapting the space to new needs. The house as a living inheritance. In Nazareth, domestic structures have also been identified that match the kind of rural home we've imagined. Modest, functional spaces embedded in a tightly knit community. The material evidence supports the picture of villages where everyone depended on each other. Archaeology has something powerful. It eliminates distance. We're no longer talking only about ancient texts. We're seeing walls someone touched, floors someone swept, corners where someone stored food. Even wear patterns tell stories. Marks on thresholds show constant passage. Blackened areas reveal where fire burned. Subtle level changes suggest remodeling. It's daily life imprinted in stone. Sometimes surprising elements appear. Simple decorations, attempts to beautify the space. That reminds us that beyond necessity, there was a desire to create a pleasant home. And here's what's fascinating for us as modern viewers. Each discovery reduces doubt. Reconstruction stops being a broad hypothesis and becomes an increasingly precise picture. Archaeologists don't work alone. Architects, historians, climate and agriculture specialists collaborate to interpret what's found. They analyze airflow, lighting, storage methods. It's a multidisciplinary effort that adds depth to the results. When we see models or digital reconstructions based on these findings, we're looking at the synthesis of years of study. They aren't random inventions. They're evidence-based approximations. And still, there's always room for surprise. New excavations can change details, broaden perspectives, open new questions. The past is never completely closed. Most exciting of all is that every uncovered wall belonged to people who never imagined that, 2 millennia later, someone would try to reconstruct their way of life. Yet without intending it, they left enough traces for us to do it. That makes archaeology a kind of bridge. It lets us cross time and enter, respectfully, into homes that no longer have roofs but still hold memory. As we look at these remains, we realize history isn't abstract. It's made of concrete spaces, practical decisions, hands that built with effort. And thanks to that evidence, we can say the picture we've followed in this documentary has solid roots. It isn't fantasy. It's the result of listening carefully to what the earth chose to preserve. So each excavation becomes an invitation, a chance to see the past more clearly and maybe discover that those ancient homes aren't as distant as they seemed. Because in the end, the stones are still speaking. We just had to learn how to interpret them. What if much of what you imagine about houses in the time of Jesus has been shaped more by cinema than by history? It's an uncomfortable possibility, but a necessary one. For centuries, paintings, films, and series have built a powerful image that, while attractive, doesn't always match what archaeological evidence and research show us. Think of how often you've seen first-century scenes with homes that are spacious, bright, almost elegant, with uncluttered interiors and structures that seem designed so a camera can move easily. That aesthetic works on screen, but it reflects modern production needs more than ancient reality. The first big myth is size. Many portrayals show homes larger than they typically were. Yet as we've seen, most families lived in small spaces where every meter served multiple functions. Enlarging rooms lets the viewer breathe, but it pulls us away from the authentic experience. Another common error is visual cleanliness. In film, interiors often look tidy, almost minimalist. In real life, a first-century home was full of tools, containers, food, textiles, and sometimes animals. It was an active space, filled with movement. Not chaotic, but intensely lived in. There's also the myth of clearly separated areas. Many productions show perfectly defined rooms, bedroom here, dining room there, kitchen separate. Reality was more flexible. The same places changed function throughout the day. That constant transformation is hard to portray, but it was essential. Lighting is another interesting point. Films often use plenty of light so the viewer can see every detail. But at night, an oil lamp created a dim, intimate environment with deep shadows. The atmosphere was completely different. Even the idea of luxury is sometimes exaggerated. Of course, there were homes of people with resources, but they were less common than fiction suggests. Most daily life unfolded in far more modest structures. These myths didn't appear by accident. They come from our modern need to understand the past through familiar visual codes. We adapt history to make it comfortable. The problem is that in doing so, we lose important nuances. Because when we reduce density, noise, and closeness, we also reduce the human intensity of the stories. History feels more distant, less tangible. Breaking these myths can be surprising, even unsettling. But it's also liberating. It lets us get closer to people of the past as they really were, with their limitations and their creativity. By replacing the cinematic image with a more realistic one, we discover the events carry more force. Gatherings are tighter, conversations more direct, decisions more courageous. The next time you see an artistic representation, you can enjoy it, but you'll also look beyond it. You'll know that behind the staging there's a different reality, maybe more humble, but also more authentic. And that shift in perspective completely transforms the way we understand the ancient world. After this journey, the houses of Jesus' time are no longer simple ruins. They are places full of voices, effort, and real life. We've crossed low doorways, climbed mud roofs, and felt how every corner helped sustain families, traditions, and hope. If this journey helped you imagine the past in a new way, this is only the beginning. There are still many details of the biblical world to discover, and each one can change how we understand history. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next documentaries, leave a like so more people can find this content, and tell us in the comments which part of the ancient home surprised you most. We'd love to read you on the next journey into the past.